Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by and welcome to National Safety Month, How to Create a Safer OSHA-Compliant Workforce webinar. Please note that during the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, simply use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Wednesday, June 10th, 2015. You'll also receive a copy of the slides, so you'll have all the information for future reference in 2 days. My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I am your host on behalf of HR Direct. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I am pleased to introduce you to our speaker, John Hyman, partner in the Ohio-based law firm Myers, Roman, Freeburg & Lewis today, and he is also author of the highly regarded labor and employment law blog, Ohio Employers Law Blog. A few housekeeping items we'll cover one more time. Use the chat box, and if you're having audio trouble, please message us and we'll be happy to assist you. Again, you'll receive a copy of the slides via email from HR Direct in the next 2 days for everything for future reference, and you can join the conversation with us on social media with National Safety Month hashtag. Okay, John, taking it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're listening from today. Greetings from Cleveland, Ohio, home of the soon-to-be NBA champion Cleveland Cavaliers. It's great to be with everyone today to talk about a topic that is really very important, but often I think overlooked in the HR world, which is OSHA and workplace safety. But before we dive into that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been representing companies for almost 2 decades in all aspects of labor and employment law. My practice has a really nice split between litigation, and I say it's a nice split because litigation, for those of you who have unfortunately been involved with your companies being sued, know what a grind litigation can be, and 50% what I call like the outside in-house counsel for companies that don't have in-house counsel or don't have in-house counsel skilled in labor and employment law. I'm there to answer the phone when they need to fire someone, need a policy drafted, someone complains of harassment, someone gets injured on the job, or what have you. When I am not practicing law, I'm writing about labor and employment law. I'm a full-time blogger. I blog every day at the Ohio Employers Law Blog, which is hyperlinked there in the presentation, on all matters of labor and employment law from a management side or employer's perspective. It's been recognized by the American Bar Association as one of the top 100 legal blogs for the last 5 years running. And if you want to see me speak, in addition to just hearing me speak, I yesterday taped a segment for John Stossel's show on Fox Business News, and you can tune in Friday night at 8, if I can give a little plug for myself, on Fox Business Friday night at 8 on Stossel to see me give a nice little 7 or 8 minute segment on labor and employment law. So, having said all that, now that I'm done talking about myself, which I ordinarily hate doing, we're going to start with a poll. As you know, this webinar is about OSHA and workplace safety, so I want to start off with a quick question about the industry your business is in, to get a sense of kind of what the audience is that I'm speaking to today. Since OSHA standards are grouped under certain industry categories, I'm curious to know which of those categories are represented here today. So if you could take a second and click the appropriate box. We typically think of workplace safety as, just a, heavy industry problem. I can tell you, for example, in office environments are not, safe from OSHA. Don't assume, even if you are a construction business or general industry, as we see, a little more than 86% general industry, very small maritime and agriculture, and about 11% construction. Don't assume that if OSHA comes in, they're going to be limited just looking at your, heavy, dangerous pieces of equipment. Your office is also fair game for OSHA to take a look at, and so to keep that in mind as we're moving through, and you're thinking about kind of what safety means. What safety means in your workplace. So thanks for taking the time to answer, and we can now, with that kind of general sense of what industries we have, we can actually move into the substance of what we're going to talk about today. First things first, let me point out why now is really the ideal time to talk about workplace safety. Workplace safety matters all the time. I think one of the themes you'll hear running throughout today's presentation is when we think about workplace safety, it's not just a box we want to check off to say this is something that we've covered from a compliance perspective or a policy perspective or what have you. It's really a culture that has to go on in your workplace 24/7. And having said that, while we know that workplace safety matters all the time, it's especially significant this month because June is officially National Safety Month. Organized and supported by the National Safety Council, National Safety Month puts the all-important matter of preventing injuries and helping save lives at the forefront, creating awareness that we hopefully will carry forward not just in this National Safety Month but year-round. Also important because OSHA just recently released a new version of its the Law Job Safety and Health poster. This particular poster, which all covered employers must display prominently in their workplaces, informs workers of their rights and employers of their legal obligation to provide a safe workplace. While the update is a non-mandatory posting change to a mandatory posting, in other words, your current poster remains compliant for the time being, the new poster does include expanded information that matters to many employees and employers alike. And if you don't have the poster up in your workplace, now's a good time to get it up. And you obviously want to take a look at the new poster that OSHA recently published. Not surprisingly, OSHA, which for the uninitiated stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, plays plays the starring role in today's webinar. As the federal agency that establishes and enforces safe and healthful conditions for workers, OSHA has stated, quote, making a living shouldn't have to cost your life. Workplace fatalities, injuries, and illnesses are preventable. Safe jobs happen because employers make the choice to fulfill their responsibilities and protect their workers. Really, really powerful words when you think about what OSHA is saying, and I think it really helps drive home the point that workplace safety starts with you, the employer. No matter what business you're in, you can't ignore safety. Really, when you get down to it, the stakes are really too high. The insurance costs, the workers' comp costs, the penalties and fines, the human factor that goes into it. Really, no matter what business you're in, no matter what industry you're in, you just simply can't ignore safety. The good news is that the time and money you invest in safety really does pay off. It reduces costs, fewer lost work days, increased productivity, increased worker morale, as well as the increased protections from OSHA, inspections and penalties and fines that come with them. Let me just say that OSHA in the last 6 years has gotten extraordinarily aggressive in their investigations, their citations and their fines and penalties. If OSHA is not in your workplace right now, and for most of you they're probably not, it's safe to assume they will be at some point. And so what you need to do is treat every second that OSHA is not in your workplace investigating as found time. Found time to emphasize safety, prioritize safety, audit your safety, make sure that you are OSHA compliant with all standards, figure out what problems need to be fixed and fix them before OSHA comes in. And I can guarantee you that every dollar you spend proactively, you will get returned to you many, many, many fold if OSHA eventually does come in and conduct an investigation. All right, so what are we going to learn today? I mean, look, this is a big, complicated topic, especially for high-hazard, high-risk companies. What I'm not going to do today is bury you with reams and reams of OSHA standards or try to bury you in legalese. This is going to be a thorough but relatively informal talk about the general aspects of OSHA compliance and safety that apply across the widest range of employers. Really kind of a common shared ground for small businesses. And hopefully what it will do is give you kind of a better grasp of what it takes to create a safe, accident-free workplace and avoid the cost and trouble that comes from preventable injuries and illnesses. And so this is really what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the general OSHA safety standards applicable to every business and industry, steps to take to implement a successful safety program, OSHA record-keeping and reporting requirements, including the revised rule effective January 1 of this year, and then effective workplace training, including HazCom standard and some upcoming compliance deadlines. Who must comply with OSHA safety standards? The short answer really is three simple letters, Y-O-U-U. Many federal labor laws apply to companies with a minimum number of employees. That's just not the case with safety rules. All employers, no matter the size, are governed by OSHA's General Duty Clause, which states that you must provide a place of employment that is free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. Let me make a quick point here. OSHA is a federal agency, but that's not the only agency that might regulate your workplace. 27 states and U.S. territories operate their own OSHA-approved safety and health programs, and OSHA allows this as long as the state program is as strict and effective as OSHA is on the federal side, which means that coverage is at a minimum provided federally by OSHA, and additionally, potentially, depending on what state you're in, by your own specific state program. But focusing, obviously, the breadth of these 27 different state programs is well beyond a 1-hour webinar. We're going to focus on the federal standards, OSHA. And look, there are hundreds of safety standards under the Federal Code of Regulations, which cover a wide variety of workplace hazards, such as electrical hazards, toxic substances, fall hazards, machine hazards, infectious diseases, fire and explosion hazards, etc. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages that would take you years to read through, and would likely, within the first paragraph, quickly put you to sleep, which is why I'm here to try to help kind of break it down and simplify it for you. The standards and their parts are grouped into 4 major categories, which goes with the 4 industries we polled at the beginning: general industry, construction, maritime industry, and agriculture. While some standards are specific to just one industry, others apply across all industries. Among the standards with similar requirements for all industries are 1, access to medical and exposure records, 2, personal protective equipment, better known as PPE, and 3, hazard communication. And again, regardless of what industry you're in, the General Duty Clause affects every employer, requiring you to provide a safe workplace environment that protects workers. And a quick point about the General Duty Clause, if OSHA comes in and investigates, just because you haven't violated a particular standard, a specific safety standard, if OSHA sees something it doesn't like, they will use the General Duty Clause to cite and fine you. So it really is, we talk about it kind of as an affirmational, aspirational goal, but it is one that unfortunately has some teeth behind it. I think I got behind on the slides, and I apologize. Okay. Let's talk about the specific shared federal OSHA standards in a little more detail. As I said, there were 3 biggies: access to medical and exposure records, personal protective equipment, and hazard communication. The access to medical and exposure records regulation ensures right of access to employees, their designated representatives, and of course OSHA to relevant medical records, including records related to an employee's exposure to toxic substances. The PPE standard requires you to provide personal equipment to employees to protect them against certain hazards and to see to it that they are effectively trained on the use of this equipment. This equipment can range from, for example, protective helmets to prevent head injuries in construction, to eye protection, hearing protection, hard-toed shoes, special goggles, breathing apparatus, etc. And lastly, we have hazard communication. OSHA's hazard communication standard is based on a simple concept that employees have a right to know the hazards of the chemicals they're exposed to in the workplace. As such, employers with hazardous chemicals must furnish proper labels and safety data sheets, or SDSs, to employees and train them on how to handle these chemicals. To better protect workers, OSHA recently revised its HazCom standard, aligning it with the United Nations globally harmonized system. This new standard, which will be fully effective in 2016, classifies chemicals based on their health and physical hazards and establishes consistent labels and safety data sheets for all chemicals made in the U.S. and imported from abroad. We'll discuss the new HazCom labeling system and training requirements in more detail later in this webinar. Now that we know generally the main OSHA standards that apply to businesses like yours, it's time to talk about establishing a health and safety program. Perhaps you're saying to yourself, you know, we're an office with a handful of employees. What life-threatening injuries do we need to concern ourselves with? After all, you don't use heavy equipment or handle toxic materials, don't have employees up on scaffolding, right? Well, here's what it comes down to. When you make job safety a part of your everyday operation, you're making a statement about how you value your employees. Similarly, you're protecting the value of your business itself. Losses from employee injuries, absenteeism, and damage to equipment can directly affect your bottom line. As I said earlier, you know, even if you have some sort of safety program in place, compare it to what I'm about to tell you. Make safety priority. Get it up to date. Update it. Train. Safety should be one of the most paramount goals that you have for your business. And you know, I go in and look at company safety programs all the time, and it's rare to find one, you know, that can't use some improvement or some polish on it. You know, I'm also point out that when an OSHA inspector comes in to do as part of an OSHA investigation, one of the first questions that inspector is going to ask when she comes in is, may I see your safety plan? If there isn't one, it's going to be a pretty good signal that there's safety violations that this inspector is going to find. OSHA inspections, more often than not, are about perception. If you create the perception that you make safety a priority by having things like your OSHA logs available for inspection, by having the safety and training programs available for the OSHA inspector to see on request, if everything looks neat and tidy, you're going to create the impression that you prioritize safety, whether you do or not. And if you create that impression, you're going to give the investigator less of an incentive to dig for violations, which I can guarantee you will pay off, or should pay off, in an easier inspection and hopefully fewer citations and lower fines. What are the 4 parts to creating a solid safety program? Look, you recognize the importance of a rock-solid safety program and want to be certain your business is covering all the bases. Although having a safety program doesn't guarantee compliance with every OSHA standard, it certainly goes a long way towards putting you on the right side of workplace safety. Basically, it should involve 4 components per OSHA. This 4-point program relies heavily on the agency's experience with its voluntary protection program, which recognizes excellence in workplace safety and health management. Part 1 is a management commitment and employee involvement. You, your managers, or your management team should lead the way. This includes establishing policies, assigning responsibilities, and involving people on your staff. Second, you need to do a worksite analysis, not just initially for your safety program, but on an ongoing basis. You want to monitor your general and individual working conditions to identify existing and potential hazards. Thirdly, there's hazard prevention and control. As a next step, for those hazards you've identified in your worksite analysis, you need a process for preventing, controlling, or remedying them. And finally is training for employees, supervisors, and managers. Everyone in your office should be trained to understand and deal with workplace hazards. Look, that's just an overview. Let's take a look now at each of these 4 items in greater detail. As you recall, step 1 is management commitment and employee involvement. As I said earlier, the key to building a culture of safety, and that's really what we're striving to do here, culture, that's the key, is to make your safety program a part of everyday business, which is really the focus of management commitment and employee involvement. OSHA states prominently on its website, as the owner or manager of a small business, your attitude towards job safety and health will be reflected by your employees. If you are not interested in preventing employee injury and illness, your employees will probably not give safety and health much thought either. And look, if your employees aren't giving safety and health much thought either, that's a pretty good sign that they are at increased risk for workplace injuries. Because all of you are on this webinar right now, I'm going to make the assumption that that's not the case with you, that you are more than interested in preventing employee injuries and illnesses. That's why you're here listening today. Here's some ways to show your commitment to safety from the top down. Here's some ways to show your commitment to safety from the top down and engage your employees along the way. 1, have a clear workplace policy on worker safety and health. Post it where employees will see it, like right next to the mandatory OSHA job safety and health poster. Hold regular meetings with your employees to communicate your safety and health policy. Use this time to discuss your safety goals, such as achieving a certain number of injury-free days and reducing the incidence rates for certain injuries. You know, if you are in a construction or heavy machinery, you may have daily toolbox meetings, leads or supervisors with employees. Great time to go ahead and communicate these health and safety goals and policies. Make sure senior managers are visibly involved in your safety program. That, more than anything, signals to workers that you're serious about safety. For example, managers can review inspection and accident reports and follow up with employees personally, give them personal feedback. You can assign responsibility for every part of the program, and hold managers, supervisors, and employees accountable for what's expected of them as part of the safety program. You want to be reviewing your program at least once a year to make sure the job of improved safety is really happening. And recognize and reward those who are doing well. For employees that are committed to safety, a $25 Starbucks card is going to go a long way to reinforcing your commitment to safety. And for those that are shirking their responsibilities, treat it like you would any other performance issue in the workplace. Document discipline. And like most workplace initiatives, you want to review your accomplishments and progress at least once a year, and make adjustments where necessary. The second step is as doing your worksite analysis. To get a better handle on what hazards may lurk within your business, you really should conduct this baseline worksite survey. If you'd like help with this, you can call your state's on-site consultation program, have an experienced health and safety professional visit your workplace for free. In Ohio, where I practice, the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation will do that for you. It's a fabulous free service. You'll find locations for each state listed on OSHA's website. OSHA publishes a book called Job Hazard Analysis, which is also very helpful. That done, there's ongoing work that needs to be done as well. You'll need to set up a self-inspection system to check on workplace conditions periodically and identify any new hazards. These self-inspections can cover everything from building conditions, electricity, lighting and machinery, to fire prevention, first aid and evacuation. You'll need to provide a way for employees to notify managers about hazardous conditions. Employees will be watching your response to their concerns, so make sure it's timely and effective. In addition, employees should be able to share and speak up without fear of reprisal or retaliation. Really important, OSHA protects whistleblowers, prohibits retaliation, and you want to make sure your employees understand that they can speak up without fear of reprisal or retribution. Always investigate accidents and near-miss incidents, explore their causes, and take action to prevent them in the future. The fines and penalties from an OSHA perspective ratchet up significantly for violations that are repeated or willful. If you don't investigate an accident and take steps to prevent it from happening again, it's going to look a lot more to OSHA like a willful violation, which is a much more significant fine than a non-willful violation. Analyze injury and illness trends over time, identify patterns, and again take the necessary action to improve. This is where your OSHA logs, while required to be kept by law, are a great tool to use to kind of look for trends that you may find from injuries or illnesses over time. All right, who's ready for another poll? Since we just went over how to do a worksite analysis and self-inspection of possible hazards, I'm curious to know what you think the top safety violations reported by OSHA last year. While I wouldn't expect you to rattle off all 10, perhaps you know the top 2 areas that get employers in trouble. What do you think the top 2 were for 2014? We have a winner. All right, so at 61%, most of you answered number 2, fall protection and HazCom, which is exactly right. So kudos to the 61% of you who answered correctly. Similar to most years, the biggest problem area for employers, according to OSHA inspections and summaries, were fall protection and hazard communications. Regarding fall protection, there were more than 6,100 fall protection violations involving uncovered holes, lack of protection from open sides and edges, and falls from roofs, and more than 5,100 hazard communication violations from things like inadequate education and training, improper labeling of containers, and failing to provide access to the required safety data sheets. Okay, so moving on now, let's look at hazard prevention and control. Once you've identified existing and potential hazards, it's time to put systems into place that will eliminate or reduce those hazards and prevent the types of violations we just looked at. OSHA recommends you approach this in a few ways. First, you should use engineering controls whenever possible to eliminate hazards, such as replacing a more hazardous chemical with a less hazardous one, or installing machine guards, for example. Next, you should provide barriers, which typically means personal protective equipment to safeguard your employees from certain hazards. These may include respirators, hearing protection, protective clothing, safety glasses, hard hats, etc. Then there's the matter of administrative control, where you create work practices and policies to reduce the exposure to risk factors, providing more frequent breaks or rotating jobs, for example. One thing I recommend companies do, for example, if noise is a particular problem in a workplace, a particularly loud manufacturing facility, you can rotate the schedule of what machines are running. So if you have 2 machines that are particularly loud when they're operating next to each other, you don't run them simultaneously. You create a schedule where you're only running one at a time. It's an example of a good administrative control for an area that OSHA takes at least in my jurisdiction in Ohio, takes a really hard look at, which is noise in manufacturing facilities. Remember, though, that unlike engineering controls, these administrative controls don't eliminate hazards. They're only as good as how your employees follow them. Employee participation and your follow-through to ensure their participation is really key to make sure that these administrative controls work. In addition to those main tactics, you also need to do things like maintain your facilities and equipment to prevent breakdowns, which can lead to hazards being created. You need to plan and prepare for emergencies, including fires and natural disasters. and need to establish a medical program that includes things like on-site first aid, an on-call physician, and emergency medical care. Your emergency medical procedure should outline how to handle injuries, transport ill or injured workers, and get in contact with nearby medical facilities. The last aspect of an effective safety and health program is training. Employees have a right to know the materials and equipment they're working with and how to steer clear of any hazards. Put another way, under no circumstance should an employee be subjected to a job that appears unsafe. This means receiving thorough instructions on how to do the job properly and free of known risks. As Kimberly asked before today's webinar, is OSHA training required for all industries? And the answer is it really depends on the specific hazards we're talking about and the specific OSHA standard as it is particularly applicable to your industry. Many OSHA standards have specific training requirements, including trainer qualifications, topics to be covered, training methods, and the frequency of refresher training. For example, in general industry alone, there are nearly 60 specific training requirements related to things like lockout tagout of machinery, bloodborne pathogens, forklift operation, PPE, and hazardous chemicals, all areas of emphasis that OSHA takes a look at when they're coming into a particular workplace. While we're on the topic of employee training, I'd like to revisit for a second the new OSHA Hazard Communication Standard. Which I mentioned earlier. OSHA aligned the HazCom standard with the United Nations Globally Harmonized System, or GHS, to establish more uniformity and better protect workers. As part of the new standard, all employers with hazardous chemicals should have trained workers on the modified labeling system and how to interpret the safety data sheet by December 1 of 2013. So that's almost 2 years ago. As of June 1 of this year, which is 9 short days ago, all chemical manufacturers, importers, and distributors were expected to be in compliance with this new standard, which includes classification of chemicals and preparation of safety data sheets and GHS labels. More deadlines to be aware of. By December 1 of this year, the grace period ends for distributors shipping any existing inventory with older labels. Full compliance with the final rule is effective in 1 year, June 1 of 2016. By this date, all employers are responsible for updating the written workplace HazCom program to incorporate the new GHS requirement and for making sure that training is completed for all employees. OSHA estimates that more than 5 million workplaces are affected by this new standard. And while the connection to certain industries may seem obvious, such as construction, manufacturing, and healthcare, even businesses that carry certain types of cleaning products must comply. I saw a question pop up asking about whether cleaning solutions are considered, and the answer is yeah. So your run-of-the-mill office that has certain cleaning supplies just to clean surfaces very well is going to have some compliance issues under these new hazardous communication standards. When it comes to meeting your obligations under these new HazCom standards, you're in luck. The experts at HR Direct provide a comprehensive training program to teach employers about the new hazard guideline, along with certain supplemental products like posters and quick reference cards to help them identify chemical hazards and read the 16-section safety data sheet. I strongly encourage you to check these out to simplify your training efforts, as again, these compliance deadlines, some have already passed and some are very quickly coming on the horizon. Oh, so how's everyone holding up? I know we've covered a lot in the last half hour or so. We have a few more items on the agenda to tackle. I'd like to shift gears a bit and talk about OSHA's record-keeping requirements. Ideally, all the time and attention you put into creating a comprehensive safety program and executing it each and every day means you'll never have a workplace accident or injury. But we all know that, well, accidents do happen, and when they do, the record-keeping and reporting rules kick in. In general, you must report work-related fatalities, injuries, and illnesses unless you're a small business with 10 or fewer employees in the past calendar year, or you fall under certain retail, service, finance, insurance, and real estate sectors classified by OSHA as low hazard. Keep in mind that even if your company is exempt from OSHA's record-keeping requirements, you still must display the OSHA Job Safety and Health poster where employees and applicants can see it. You also have to report fatalities, hospitalizations, and a few other injuries, which I'll explain a little later when I touch on the new record-keeping rule, which became effective January 1 of this year. OSHA uses employer records to measure its performance and to conduct inspections. In addition, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, better known as BLS, pulls from OSHA records to compile its annual survey of occupational injuries and illnesses. And this data helps you too, as I mentioned earlier. Reviewing your OSHA injury logs is a great way to develop and improve your safety program, since you'll have an on-site running tally of any workplace injuries, incidents, and the details surrounding them. One more thing, OSHA requires you to involve your employees in record keeping by setting up a system for them to report work-related injuries and illnesses themselves, and allow them access to your injury and illness records. Okay, so from a compliance standpoint, who must comply? Sorry. Okay, got a little behind, and I apologize. So let's kind of go through the record-keeping process step by step. Anytime there's an incident involving an employee in your workplace, you should answer each of these questions to guide you through the process. Step 1 is, did the employee experience an illness or injury? Injuries may include cuts, fractures, sprains, and amputations, while illnesses may include skin diseases, respiratory disorders, and poisonings. Step 2 is the injury or illness work-related. A work-related injury or illness means the work environment either caused or contributed to the condition or significantly aggravated a pre-existing illness or injury. And the work environment includes physical locations where the employee or employees work, as well as the equipment or materials used by the employees in performing their jobs. There are some exceptions to what qualifies as an illness or an injury under OSHA, and there's a bunch of them that you should keep in mind. One, at the time of the injury or illness, the employee was at the workplace as a member of the general public rather than an employee. So if you, for example, operate a retail store and someone who works for you comes in off duty to buy something and suffers an injury, that is not a reportable injury under OSHA standards because the person was not working as an employee at the time. Second, the injury or illness involves signs or symptoms that surfaced at work but resulted solely from a non-work-related event or exposure from outside of work. 3, the injury or illness resulted solely from voluntary participation in a wellness program or a medical, physical, or recreational activity. As many of you know, under the Affordable Care Act, for example, we can get great benefits that we can then pass through to our employees on health insurance costs by rolling out, wellness programs with certain biometric targets for employees to hit. Employees' voluntary participation in that wellness program, however, if it results in an injury or illness, will not trigger a reportable event for purposes of OSHA. Next, the injury or illness resulted solely from an employee eating, drinking, or preparing food for personal consumption, whether bought on your premises or brought in. The injury or illness is due to an employee doing personal tasks unrelated to the job outside assigned working areas. The injury or illness is solely the result of personal grooming, self-medication for a non-work-related condition, or was self-inflicted. There's more. The injury or illness was caused in an auto accident, in a company parking lot or company access road during a commute. The illness is the common cold or flu. Don't have to report that, thank God. And the illness is a mental illness. OSHA only covers physical injuries, does not cover reporting for mental illnesses. What happens if an employee is traveling? if an employee is injured while traveling for work, is that a reportable illness or injury? OSHA says yes, injuries and illnesses that occur while an employee is traveling are work-related if they occurred while the employee was engaged in work activities in the interest of the employer. So you have a salesman that's driving from customer to customer and suffers an injury or an illness that's work-related. Yeah, that's going to be reportable. That being said, or think truck drivers, for example. That being said, OSHA has two exceptions for traveling employees. You don't have to record an injury or an illness if it occurred while the employee is on a personal detour, which would take them outside of something in the interest of the employer, or if it occurs after an employee checks into a hotel, motel, or temporary residence. Employee is on overnight travel, checks into Motel 6, forgets to leave the light on, and falls when they go into their motel room, and hurts themselves, not a reportable injury or illness for purposes of OSHA. What about employees working from home? That's what I'm doing today. I flew in from New York this morning, and my office is 45 minutes from the airport. My home is 5, so rather than go into the office today, I just came and set up shop at my home office for the day. What about those employees working from home? Illnesses and injuries that occur while an employee is working at home, including working in a home office, are considered work-related if the employee is performing work for pay or compensation. The employee is either performing work for pay or is being compensated for work they're being done at home, and the injury or illness is directly related to the performance of work rather than to the general home environment. Really, look, you're not going to go and audit every employee's home office or home work site, which is really where the training and education component kicks in, because if you have employees working from home, they need to understand what risks they need to look for to minimize the risk of an OSHA recordable injury being suffered while they're working from home. Step 3, moving on, in deciding whether an injury or illness is reportable, is the injury or illness a new case? The incident is a new case if the employee, 1, didn't previously experience a similar recorded injury or illness affecting the same part of the body, and 2, had experienced a similar recorded injury or illness affecting the same part of the body but recovered completely, and an event or exposure at work caused the signs or symptoms to reappear. And step 4, does the injury or illness meet the general criteria? A work-related injury or illness must be recorded if it results in one or more of the following general criteria. It results in days away from work. It results in work restrictions or transfer to another job. It results in medical treatment beyond kind of routine first aid. It results in a loss of consciousness. It results in a diagnosed significant injury or illness, or God forbid, it results in a fatality. And then here's really the biggie. So we know we have to record the injury or illness, but how do we go about doing it? Let's talk for a second about the nitty-gritty of record keeping, the actual forms. To ensure compliance, you must use 1, the OSHA 301, which is the Injury and Illness Incident Report, to capture the details of any job-related illness or injury within 7 days of it occurring. Secondly, the OSHA 300 log, which is the log of work-related injuries and illnesses, which keeps a running tally of incidents throughout the year, and separately for each establishment in your business. And then third, the OSHA 300A, which is the summary of work-related injuries and illnesses, which you post in a conspicuous place by February 1 through April 30 the following year. So just to sum up, there are 3 OSHA forms you must complete: the 300, the 301, which are maintained on an ongoing basis throughout the year, the 301 to get the specific details of the incident, and the 300 to keep a running tally of your workplace incidents, and the 300A to be completed by February 1, which is a summary of the number of recordable cases for the previous year, which then must be posted until the following April 30. Please note that, as I mentioned earlier, employees, former employees, and their representatives have the right to review OSHA records, including the 300 log. The 300-day summary that you post each year creates an additional layer of awareness and transparency about the injuries and illnesses that occur in the workplace. And one more additional administrative note, you need to keep all of these OSHA forms on file for 5 years. OSHA has the right, if they come in, to ask for your records going back 5 years, and you will be cited if you can't produce them going back on a 5-year period. While we're on the topic of record keeping, let me remind you that September 11, 2014, OSHA announced changes to the list of industries that are exempt from the record keeping requirements. And here's where it matters most: the types of severe work-related injuries and illnesses that all covered employers must report. OSHA previously required you to report work-related fatalities and inpatient hospitalizations involving 3 or more employees. The revised record-keeping rule, which went into effect January 1 of this year, now requires work-related fatalities to be reported within 8 hours, as well as all work-related inpatient hospitalizations, amputations, and loss of an eye within 24 hours. You must report these incidents by telephone or in person to the area OSHA office nearest to your work site. Let me look. If you make a quick point about why it's important to get out in front of everything we've talked about today. God forbid an employee has a fatality. You have a fatality on the job, or an employee loses an eye. You can't ignore that. You have to report that within 8. You have to report that the fatality within 8 hours, the loss of an eye, amputation, whatever, within 24 hours, and OSHA will come out and investigate, guaranteed. There's lots of reasons why OSHA will come out and investigate. Maybe an employee complains. Maybe it's a random investigation in a target industry. But if you report a serious injury or a fatality, you can bet they're going to be out as soon as possible. And once they're in, they're in. They are limited as a matter of inspection to what they see in your workplace, or rather they're limited to the what brought them into your workplace to begin with. But once they're in, anything that is in plain sight is game for inspection, and anything that is an area of either national or local emphasis for OSHA is also game for inspection, and they have the right and they will take a look at it. So areas of national emphasis, things like heavy machinery, whether a piece of equipment was involved in the incident that brought OSHA in or not, OSHA will take a look at all the pieces of heavy equipment in your workplace to make sure that they are OSHA compliant. They'll be looking at, lockout, tagout to make sure that they're in place. They'll be looking at guarding. They'll be looking at how the employees operate the machines. They'll be listening for noise and what have you. Similarly, in where I am in Ohio, we have areas of local emphasis that include things like noise and heavy machinery, things like fall protections, things like overhead cranes and whatnot. And OSHA will take a look at those things as well if it's an area of local emphasis, and you can find those listed on the OSHA website for what are areas of national emphasis and then local emphasis for your particular jurisdiction. Because once OSHA's in, they're in. They won't just say, well, this particular machine is what brought us out for the complaint, and therefore we are only going to take a look at that piece of equipment. They're going to look at everything they can possibly get their hands on, because they, number one, want to protect safety, but number two, they also want to, not to be overly cynical, but want to generate revenue for their office through fines and citations. And so if you wait for OSHA to come out to start figuring out whether or not you're in compliance, you're too late, which is why everything we've talked about today is so vitally important to creating not just an OSHA-compliant workplace, but a culture of safety, within your business. And with that, we've reached the end of today's presentation. Just to wrap everything up, here are the main takeaways I hope you've received from the webinar. One, OSHA recently released a new version of the It's the Law Job Safety and Health poster. It's a non-mandatory change, but even still, you should have the previous OSHA poster on display prominently where employees and applicants can see it to be in compliance. Regarding training, you should be training any employee who works with hazardous chemicals on the new labeling system under the United Nations Globally Harmonized System, or GHS. While compliance deadlines have been phased in since December 1, 2013, full compliance with the revised HazCom standard, including all labeling and training requirements, is effective June 1, 2016, or a little less than a year from today. One other OSHA change is the OSHA record-keeping rule that came into effect January 1st of this year, which requires you to report work-related fatalities within 8 hours and hospitalizations, amputations, and loss of an eye within 24 hours. When it comes to greater safety and accident prevention, every employer can benefit from a comprehensive workplace safety program, which involves 4 key parts: management commitment and employee involvement, worksite analysis, hazard prevention and control, and finally training. And one final reminder, although there are hundreds of different OSHA standards affecting different businesses across different industries, the General Duty Clause requires all employers to provide a workplace free from recognizable hazards likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And with that, now that I've concluded the prepared part of today's presentation, I'd like to take some of the questions that you shared earlier or in the chat box as you followed along with me today. There's lots of them, so what we're going to do is try and skim through them and pick out those that we think are going to be the most helpful to, most beneficial, helpful to everybody as a group.
Yeah, John, I want to chime in. That was a lot to cover, and we've gotten a lot of questions. And as we did mention, we asked everyone who registered if they had a question they wanted to ask and wanted us to cover during the presentation. We tried to cover as many as we could throughout the actual material today, but we did get a few that we wanted to cover and answer for you after in this Q&A portion. There's still plenty of time to submit your questions if you want to submit them in the chat box, and we'll survey and question and answer a mix of the ones from those who registered and those who are asking questions right now. The first question comes from Nancy, who asked earlier at registration, are there any differences in the rules for employers of less than 10 employees?
Yeah, as we touched on earlier, all employers, regardless of size, must have to provide a workplace free from hazards under the General Duty Clause. So 1 employee, 10 employees, 100 employees, 1,000 employees, General Duty Clause says you have to provide a workplace free from hazard. Regarding injury and illness records, employers with 10 or fewer employees during the last calendar year, as well as businesses in certain industries, are partially exempt from record keeping. However, if you experience a fatality or a hospitalization, or more accurately, if one of your employees suffers a fatality or hospitalization, you still have to report the incident to OSHA. When counting employees, determine if you're exempt because of size, because 10 is, we may have full-time employees, we may have part-time employees, we may have temporary employees, you may bring in some seasonal workers. How do we count 10 to figure out whether we have to comply or not? The answer is you count everyone. You include your full-time, your part-time, your temps, your seasonal workers. Also, the exemption for employers with 10 or fewer employees is based on the employment of the entire company rather than the establishment. So if your company has 2 locations or 2 establishments, one with 5 and one with 7, you are an employer with more than 10 employees, and each establishment then, even though individually they fall in the less than 10 category because together they meet the threshold, then each must comply with all the OSHA record-keeping requirements, including all the various incident reports and logs that we talked about earlier.
Great. Moving on, we got a few people asking the same question, and it's specifically, where can I get a simple statement of safety practices to include in our employee handbook? So there are pretty much, a lot of people out here are looking for guidelines of what to include as safety guidelines in the employee handbook for their company.
Sure. If you're looking for just some basic help with a general safety statement, the best place to go is to the OSHA website. OSHA of all the federal agencies, OSHA has probably the best and most comprehensive and most helpful website. It's dense with information, but OSHA is just a dense law. But the OSHA does a great job of providing quality information for employers on its website. So if you just go to OSHA.gov and search for something like sample safety and health policy statement, you will actually find 3 different ones that range from a couple sentences long to a paragraph or more as good kind of exemplar safety policies to include in your handbook. Beyond that, you want to think about things that specifically apply to your business. So if you're in a state where smoking, you can't smoke at work, for example, a state with a smoke-free workplace law, you might want to include a statement in your handbook talking about, your commitment, the legal requirement of not to smoke, or you otherwise have a smoke-free workplace. Things about, not blocking access to fire extinguishers. Things about reporting hazardous situations to a manager without fear of reprisal. Things like that. As a basic rule, I recommend that companies review their handbooks annually. I know it's an expense that a lot of companies don't like to do, but I can't tell you how troubling it is for me as an attorney when I'm either defending a lawsuit or I ask a new company that I'm representing for a copy of their handbook, and it's June of 2015. It has in the footer, revised, December 2008. The laws change. Laws change every day, and the only way to know that your handbook is up to date with all of the legal and regulatory changes that have taken place is by actually taking it off the shelf, dusting it off, and going through it annually once a year to make sure that it is in compliance with all laws, not just OSHA. So that's my short and sweet kind of handbook pitch.
I think here at HR Direct we agree with you. You always should take that handbook off the shelf and update it for any type of guideline, if it's safety or any other HR regulation. And we could go to a long, long road on that one. So I'm glad we kept it short and sweet. And definitely OSHA.gov is the best resource if you have any additional questions from the information we provided today, in case we can't cover all of it, because we definitely have a lot of questions still in this queue. Another question we had from Lisa: do the injuries and illnesses of temp workers have to be recorded when you've got temp workers at your workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is yes. But with all legal questions, it's not nearly as cut and dry as just yes or no. The answer is yes, but really it comes down to who records the incident. Is the staffing agency responsible for recording it, or is the host employer responsible for recording the injury or illness? What OSHA doesn't want to have happen is for incidents to be double counted. So when OSHA is looking at just raw statistics of injuries or illnesses for its own tracking purposes, what they don't want is to have both the temp agency and the host employer both report the injury, because then it makes it look like that injury occurred twice as often, just generally, than it really does. And so what OSHA says is typically the responsibility to record incidents falls with the host employer, since at the end of the day, it's the host employer supervisor that is overseeing the temporary worker on a day-to-day basis. It's the host employer that is responsible for ensuring that the temporary worker has a safe workplace to go to on a day-to-day basis. That being said, the training of the temporary workers and the responsibility to protect them from job hazards is a shared responsibility between the staffing agency and the host employer. In many cases, what you see is the staffing agency will provide kind of general safety and health training for its employees to a wide range of settings. So they're kind of giving this very general, broad-based workplace safety training to its employees before it ever sends them out to a job site. And then the host employer will then cover specific training tailored to the specific hazards of a job assignment or the workplace. So the temp agency will give kind of general broad-based workplace safety training, and then the host employer will say, okay, this is the machine you're going to work on, and this is how to operate this machine safely. Or this is the job you're going to be doing, and this is the personal protective equipment you have to wear to safely perform this job, and this is the and this is how to use this equipment so that you don't suffer an injury or an illness. Or these are the chemicals that you're going to be exposed to in our workplace, and here's the safety data sheets and what they mean for you and how to avoid exposure and whatnot. And so the training is a shared responsibility. Typically the reporting, just because of the pragmatics of kind of the supervisor responsibilities, is going to fall with the host employer.
John, that was a great answer. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we are out of time to cover any more questions, but I want to let the audience know if your question was not answered today and you would like more information, you can email my email address, and my email address is sjthomas@hrdirect.com. You'll receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days from HR Direct. My email address will be in the signature of that email, and you can always email me with any additional questions you have about the topic we covered and the information we covered today. I'd like to thank John again. Thank you, John, for being here with us and presenting all of this very thorough information about OSHA compliance and general safety standards for the workplace. I hope everyone here learned a little bit more and are a little bit more cautious when training and educating employees about their safety standards in their work environment, especially as we celebrate National Safety Month. And as we finish up for today, I'd like to remind all of you that you will receive a copy of the presentation today. You'll receive a recording and the slides from HR Direct in the next 2 days. If you have any questions, you can always email my email address in the signature of that email. And finally, I'd like to invite you to our July webinar coming up, July 8th. We've got a webinar talking about performance management, set for success, evaluating and motivating staff through performance reviews. We'll have Mike Haberman, a human resources consultant, presenting the information for us. And he'll be telling us a little bit about performance management and how to motivate your staff through successful performance reviews. Performance reviews aren't just a periodic 1-month evaluation, they're year-long. Reviews should serve as both a look back at past performance and a time to set expectations for future work. While it can be difficult to set aside the time to prepare for and conduct long meetings with each employee, doing so is essential to your business, and we'll be definitely guiding you through that year-long process. In this webinar, you'll learn how to evaluate and appraise yearly employee performance, how to create achievable, effective goals for employees, and how to motivate your underperforming employees. So this will definitely be an interesting webinar just like the one we had today. And the invite to that webinar will be in your email, follow-up email that you'll receive from HR Direct, like I mentioned, in the next 2 days. Thank you again, John. Thank you, everyone, for participating, asking questions, and staying with us for the full hour. Have a great day.